face was beaming. "Gracious! You can play, can't you?" "I used to. Suppose we talk a while." She agreed, reluctantly. They seated themselves in easy chairs before the gas logs. Evelyn glanced hopefully at the chandelier. "I wish the belt would slip at the power house, don't you?" "Why?" innocently. "Oh, just because bright lights are such a nuisance when a girl has a feller calling on her. And these logs give a perfectly respectable light, don't they?" "Indeed they do. But perhaps we'd better leave the others on." She sighed resignedly. "I guess we'd better. Sis is so darned proper and Gerald is an old crab, they might say something." "I suppose they might. By the way, didn't they think it was strange, my coming to see you tonight?" She turned red. "Suppose they did. What difference does that make? I'm not a child, and if a gentleman wants to call on me, I guess they haven't got any kick." "What did they say when you told them I was coming?" "They didn't believe me at first. Then Sis said you were too old. And you're not old at all. And Gerald said, he said," she giggled. "What did Gerald say?" "He said, 'Damned impertinence.'" "H'm. I wonder just what he meant." "Oh, goodness, it doesn't matter what Gerald means. He makes me weary. He's simply impossible, and I can't see what Sis ever married him for." "I suppose she saw more in him than you do. They must be very happy together."
"Happy? Poof! Happy as two dead sardines in a can. They can't get out, so they might as well be happy. Besides, he's away a good deal."
"He is, eh? When was his last out of town trip?" Carroll was interested now. He had steered the conversation back to matters of importance.
"Oh, 'bout 4 days ago, you know, the day dear Roland was killed by that vampire in the taxicab."
"He was away that night? All night?"
"Uh-huh. All night long. And would you believe that Sis, who is scared out of her shadow at night, was the one who suggested that I go spend the night with Hazel? And it's certainly fortunate she did, because if she hadn't, I wouldn't have been with Hazel all night, and you awful detectives would probably not have believed her story that she was at home in bed, and then you would have arrested her for murdering Roland, and she'd have gone to jail and been hanged or something. Wouldn't she?"
"Hardly that bad. But it was fortunate that you were there. It made the establishing of the alibi a very simple matter. And you say your sister, Mrs. Lawrence, is nervous at night?"
"Oh, fearfully. She's just like all women, scared of rats, scared of the dark, scared of being alone, perfectly disgusting, I call it."
"Quite a few women are that way, though."
"I'm not. I'm scared of snakes and flying bugs and things like that. But I don't get scared of the dark. Pfft! Who's going to hurt you? That's what I always say. I believe in figuring things out, don't you? I read in a book once where—"
"But maybe you do Mrs. Lawrence an injustice. Maybe she isn't as afraid at night as you imagine."
"She is, too."
"Yet you say she let you spend the night at Miss Gresham's house when Mr. Lawrence was out of the city and there wasn't anybody on the place but the servants."
"Worse than that. The servants don't even live on the place. She spent the night here all alone."
"Then all I'll say is that she is a brave woman. When did Mr. Lawrence get back from Nashville?"
"Oh, not until 10 o'clock the following morning. And believe me, he was all excited when he read about Roland in the papers. Poor Roland! If you were only a girl, Mr. Carroll, you'd know how terrible it is to have a man who's crazy about you and engaged to your best friend and everything, go and get himself murdered. Why, when I read the papers that morning, I couldn't hardly believe my own eyes.
I just said to myself, 'It can't be.' I said it over and over again, just like that. Having faith, I think they call it. I was reading in a book once about having faith." She talked interminably. Carroll ceased to hear the plangent voice. He was thinking of what she had just told him, thinking earnestly. He knew he was desperately anxious to have a talk with the Lawrences, to talk things over in a casual manner. And tonight was his opportunity. He knew he'd never get another like it. He didn't want to be forced to seek them out in his capacity of detective. From somewhere in the rear of the house he heard the clamor of a doorbell, then the sound of footsteps in the hall, the opening and closing of the front door, and then Naomi Lawrence appeared in the music room. Carroll could have sworn that her eyes were twinkling with amusement as she addressed Evelyn, pointedly ignoring him. "Evelyn, that Somerville boy is here." "Oh, bother! What's he doing here?" "He says he came to call. He's got a box of candy." "Piffle! What do I care about candy? He's just a kid." Naomi went to the hall door. "Right this way, Charlie." And as the slender, overdressed young gentleman of 19 entered the room, Carroll again glimpsed the light of amusement in Naomi's eyes. Mr. Charlie Somerville expressed himself as being "pleased to meetcha," and tried to conceal his vast admiration when Evelyn informed him that this was the David Carroll. Charlie was impressed, but he was not particular about showing it, Charlie fancying himself considerable of a cosmopolite, thanks to a year at Yale. His dignity was excruciatingly funny to Carroll as the very young man seated himself, crossed one elongated and unbelievably skinny leg over the other, and arranged the creases so that they were in the very middle. "Ah, taking a vacation from your work on the Warren murder case, I presume?" Carroll nodded. "Yes, for a while." "Detective work must be a terrible bore, mustn't it?" "Sometimes," answered Carroll significantly. "Charlie Somerville!" Evelyn flamed to the defense of her friend's profession. "At least Mr. Carroll isn't a college freshman." "I'm a sophomore," asserted Charlie languidly. "Passed all of my exams." "Anyway," snapped Evelyn, "he ain't any kid." For a time the atmosphere was strained. Then Carroll recalled a particularly good college joke he knew and he told it well, after which Evelyn explained to Charlie that Mr. Carroll was the wonderfulest piano player in the world, and David Carroll, detective, strummed out several popular airs while the youngsters danced. Horrible as the situation was, it appealed irresistibly to his sense of humor. He found himself almost enjoying it. And he worked carefully. Eventually his patience was rewarded. He succeeded in getting them together on a lounge with a photograph album between them, and then, very quietly and positively and with a brief "Excuse me for a moment," he walked through the hall and into the living room. Lawrence and his wife were at opposite sides of the library table. At sight of Carroll, Lawrence laid down his paper and rose to his feet. "Well?" he inquired inhospitably. Carroll laughed lightly. "It got too much for me. Too much youth. I dropped in here for a chat with you folks." "I didn't understand that you had come to call on us," said Lawrence coldly. "Why, I didn't." "You did," snapped Lawrence. "I'm no fool, Carroll. From the minute I heard you were coming, I knew what you had up your sleeve. You wanted to talk about the Warren case. Now suppose you go ahead and talk, then get out." End of chapter 12. Recording by Roger Moline.